option? And how will achieving a key campaign promise affect the president's political standing as his first year in office draws to a close? With us, White House Press Secretary Robert Gibbs. Then, America the next decade. Just days before the new year, a special discussion. Where does the country stand and where are we headed? The economy, America's role in the world, and political leadership after a tumultuous start to the 21st century. Our guests, Mayor of New York City, Michael Bloomberg, former House Speaker, Republican Newt Gingrich, Governor of Massachusetts, Democrat Deval Patrick, and NBC's Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent, Andrea Mitchell. But first, good morning. Live from Lexington, Kentucky, where I'm spending some time over the holidays with family. And while families around the nation celebrated Christmas on Friday, we came very close to coping with tragedy as a deadly act of terror was attempted on board a U.S. airliner. Yesterday, federal officials charged 23-year-old Nigerian Umar Farouk Abdul-Muttalab with trying to destroy Northwest Delta Flight 253 bound from Amsterdam to Detroit. And joining us now live from San Francisco for the very latest on the investigation in the situation is the Secretary of Homeland Security, Janet Napalitano. Secretary Napalitano, good morning and welcome back to Meet the Press. Let me start by asking you, the suspect allegedly was carrying a compound on his body of PETN. That was the same chemical compound that the shoe bomber Richard Reed had on him some 8 years ago. The fact that he had this very same compound, does this to you represent a failure of security to detect?
Oh, I think we don't know enough to say one way or the other in that respect. The forensics are still being done. The investigation is still underway. I think the important point here is that once the incident occurred, everybody reacted the way they should. The passengers did, the flight crew did, and literally within an hour, additional measures had been instituted not only on the ground here in the United States, but abroad, and indeed on the 128 flights that were already in the air from Europe.
Is this suspect a part of Al-Qaeda?
Again, we don't know. There's allegations that have been made public in the criminal complaint, but the FBI now has that matter. It's under investigation, and we shall see. What we are looking at is literally how he got on the plane to make sure that the screening procedures were followed, and if they were followed, whether they need to be changed. And then, again, making sure that on the ground, the air environment remains a safe environment, which indeed it is.
Let me just clarify, though, is your suspicion, based on intelligence you're seeing and information that he's providing, is your suspicion that he is part of Al-Qaeda?
You know, David, I don't want to speculate on that. Again, the FBI has that under investigation. We'll ascertain whether or not he is what he allegedly says he is. But what we are focused on, again, is screening, making sure that mitigation measures are in place at airports across the country. And one thing I would say, the traveling public over this holiday season as they return home is to get to the airport a little bit earlier, because there will be some additional measures, and to say we won't do the same thing at every airport, because one of the things we try not to be is predictable in this regard. So if you see screeners in one airport doing one thing but not doing it at another airport, that's not because anybody's doing anything wrong. Indeed, they're following our protocols.
Based on what you know so far, in terms of how much and what he had in his possession in terms of explosives, was it sufficient to bring down the plane had he succeeded?
Oh, I think we're far from knowing that. The forensics as to what he actually had have yet to be complete. And stepping back from this case, what it takes to actually bring down an airliner depends not only on the chemical and the amount, but where a person is on the plane, how it's detonated, all sorts of questions on that score. So the minute he began setting himself on fire, which is what it looked like, the passengers acted quickly, and indeed that's part of what I keep saying is security is everybody's responsibility. The passengers and the flight crew deserve our praise, and the system went into full alert mode, leaning forward, literally within minutes and an hour of the incident occurring in the air.
Right, but Secretary Napolitano, the question is whether the system really did do everything that it should have done. He was on a terror watch list. His father had raised concerns about him being radicalized to the U.S. Embassy in Nigeria. He was not on a do not fly list, which is a separate kind of cataloging of threats. Do you think the fact that he was on a watch list should have triggered a secondary screening in the airport in Amsterdam?
Well, this is the way it works. He was on a tied list. There are over 500,000 people on that tied list, and that information was shared throughout the federal family. There's no question about information sharing here. There had never been any additional information supplied that would move him to what's called a selectee list, where you do that kind of secondary screening, or indeed to the no-fly list, which requires specific, credible, derogatory information. Now, I think one of the things we will do, because that's a system that has been in place for a number of years, one of the things we will do is go back and look and say, well, maybe in this day and age with the kind of environment we have, we should change some of those protocols. But right now, he was on a generic list, if I could use that phrase, but we did not have the kind of information that under the current rules would elevate him.
Final question, Madam Secretary. Given this incident, given an attempt to use an airplane as a weapon, yet again, what does it say about the nature of the threat that terrorists generally, but more specifically Al-Qaeda, if that's in fact the case, still poses to the United States?
Well, I think stepping back from this case, what we see is that Al-Qaeda remains a source of threat streams to the world and indeed to the United States. And while this case does not appear specifically connected there, that leadership, that organization, that training, much of it emanates from the Afghanistan, Pakistan area, and indeed that is why Al-Qaeda and going after Al-Qaeda is such an important part of the president's Afghanistan strategy.
All right, Secretary Napolitano, I know your time is limited this morning as you're getting back to Washington. Thank you very much for being with us.